the Jack Douglas True Television Series in association with Bing Crosby Productions. Across the 7 seas, combining the different worlds of travel and adventure. Sundown, Adventure, At Home Abroad, and presenting tonight the Fabulous 50, Unusual Journeys Throughout the 50 States. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jack Douglas. And here off the coast of Maine is the beautiful Windjammer that will be our home for the next 30 minutes. Now, we're going to be the guests of this handsome couple, our own photographer, Milt Farney, and his wife, Judy, my former secretary. Now, you may remember that they were on our program about 2 months ago with the films of their honeymoon at sea. And we're certainly glad to have them with us again as they take us aboard the Windjammer.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? As Jack mentioned, we're the Farneys. One of the nice things about working for Jack is that although he's the king of travel adventure programs on TV, he never goes anywhere, which means that he stays at home and we do all the traveling.
Of course, it's also kind of hectic working with Jack. One day you're crossing the desert in Australia, and a week later you're sailing on a windjammer off the coast of Maine. It's hectic, but I'll have to admit, it's generally exciting and always a lot of fun.
Camden, Maine, just north of Portland, is our destination. It was here at Camden, incidentally, that the movie Peyton Place was filmed.
The first impression of Camden is the one that remains. You think of beautiful picture postcards.
These Windjammer cruises are operated by Captain Jim Nesbitt and his wife Dorothy. And what a small world this really is, because the Nesbitts are the same people who own the Lazy Bones, the Everglades shanty boat which Jack recently featured on this program.
During the winter months, the Nesbitts are in Florida, supervising the Lazy Bones cruises through the Everglades. In the summertime, they return to Camden for the Windjammer cruises.
The Nesbitts have 2 Windjammers. Ours would be the schooner Maddie, and this is a Maddie's twin, the schooner Mercantile. The Mercantile was already taking aboard passengers and supplies since she was scheduled to sail a few hours before the Maddie. The Mercantile measures 81 feet, has gross tonnage of 48 tons, and was built in 1916. These Windjammers have no engines and must be pushed out of the harbor by yawl boats.
Our schooner, the Maddie, was built more than 75 years ago, way back in 1882. It's almost unbelievable. She's a foot longer than the Mercantile and has a gross tonnage of 59 tons. She also is a 2-masted schooner.
When you work for generous Jack Douglas, there isn't too much time to just sit back and relax. Jack had said, be sure to interview the captain, especially if he's a real old salt. Well, Captain Fred Morey is indeed a real skipper of the old school.
How many years have you been at sea, Captain Fred?
Oh, I've been at sea about 50 years. I started when I was 18. I'll be 70 in a few days.
In 50 years at sea, you've undoubtedly had many experiences. What would you call your most interesting trip or experience?
That was a very interesting trip. We went around the world in the Apis. It was in the United States for a year. When we went to South America, we went up the Amazon, probably 400 or 450 miles, as far as any white man had ever gone in them days. And then we returned out of there, and we visited several different ports in South America and returned back home. That was my most interesting trip.
I see. Now, after 50 years at sea, when do you plan on retiring?
Oh, I retired 5 years ago. I retired 5 years ago. It's an active work.
Well, why are you still sailing then?
Oh, I just sail these boats because I like to sail these boats. I like to sail them because it gives me something to look forward to.
Once out of the harbor, we raise the sails, and by we, I mean all 28 passengers and the crew of 4. I think this is one of the most exciting moments of any voyage aboard a sailing vessel. The signal that the journey is finally underway. The realization that we will be completely dependent upon the wind,
Come on
just
now,
like the old-time
all
explorers.
together. Now go ahead, let your picks go, let your jigs go.
Heave ho! Heave ho! Heave ho! Heave
That's my wife, full of encouragement, but no muscle.
Her sails hoisted, the Maddie looked like this. Whenever Captain Maury was busy, we'd seek out Captain Jim Nesbitt.
Here's a little trick you might like to try sometime with a rope. All you have to do is lay a few hitches on, just like that, and put the end through. Now you pull it right out through. Right.
For heaven's sake!
Huh? That's a wonderful way to get a lot of knots in a rope. Of course, it does have a practical purpose. If you had to lower yourself from a burning building or down over a cliff, you could put in a whole string of knots in very short order that way.
Sure, and if you want to elope, you could get away quicker, too,
Yeah,
couldn't you?
yeah. Now all you've got to do is untie them.
Sails hoisted, we could relax, soak up the sun, and meet some of our fellow passengers.
Hi, my name is René Drouin. I'm from Montreal. I'd like you to meet my wife, Françoise.
We're really enjoying our first Windjammer cruise, especially our son Andre, who's at the helm.
My name is Paul Knudsen. I was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, 72 years ago. And I sailed for 4 years as marine engineer in my young days. This is the first time I've been on a Windjammer cruise, but I'm certainly enjoying it.
I am Marcia Gordon. As a landlubber, I am glad that my first cruise is on an old-time Windjammer.
Hi, I'm Joe Palombi. This is my wife, Jane. We've been married for 12 days now and are combining a honeymoon and vacation trip on this Windjammer cruise.
Within a week, we'll be back in Albany, where we attend medical school. We're both studying to be doctors.
Hello, my name is Bill Burgess from Montclair, New Jersey. I'd like to state that these cruises certainly offer a city dweller a rare and unique form of adventure.
I'm Andrea Rule from Garden City, New York. I'm a nurse and I'm on vacation right now, and I'm going to be joining the Peace Corps in a couple of weeks to go to Togo, Africa.
With 32 hungry humans aboard, I wondered who would feed us. Here's the man, Mr. Steve Quilty.
What's for dinner?
Well, we're going to have a chowder tonight, a fish chowder that I got in a very strange way when I was locked all night in the Lighthouse at Castine once. I was showing some passengers through from an old windjammer. The door slammed on me in the tower and left me there all night. Next morning, when a woman rescued me in a rowboat, I got this recipe from her. It's very delicious, full of herbs and salt pork, crisply browned, onions browned, rich cream and vegetables and various things, and fine, fresh fish, of course.
Oh, is that the recipe that's in the book you wrote? I understand you wrote a cookbook.
Yes, I wrote a book called Food for Men. It was a bestseller in 1952, and I've been trying to get a bestseller ever since. This recipe is in the book. Now I'm writing a new book on this boat called The Last Windjammer, and I'm using this boat for material for the new book.
I wonder if we'll be in it.
You certainly will. It's been wonderful to have you with us on the voyage.
Some of the passengers tell me that you're a concert pianist in the wintertime, Steve.
Yes, I used to be a teacher. Now I'm a concert artist. I gave it up to be a concert artist in the wintertime. I don't take any care of my hands on the boat. I go right on chopping potatoes. But in the winter, I play Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart for women's clubs, colleges, church groups, civics groups, and so on.
Well, that's what I wonder with your hands, how this would affect
I don't believe in nursing your hands. I think it's all a mental image in your mind. Of course, I'm 52 years old. Isn't like a student anymore. Those images, once in the mind, can't be changed. Those patterns at the piano keyboard are always going to be the same. I'm just going to rip up and down doing them. Potatoes or no potatoes.
Well, stew was what Mr. Quilty had in mind, but meatloaf is what we had.
Here's one thing we learned from this Windjammer cruise. No matter what you like or dislike in the way of food at home, you'll eat anything in sight when you're out at sea. While the first ship was eating, Mr. Quilty started preparing the dessert, homemade ice cream. The eager beavers watching are waiting their turn at the chow line. Well, unfortunately, Mr. Quilty decided to trust some of us landlubbers with a crucial part of the job. So that dessert looked more like mashed potatoes than ice cream.
Those first few nights, we were drowsy almost before sunset, and the Maddie was at peace with the world. As I'm sure you've noticed, we were seldom too far from land, and the reason is that there are so many interesting ports of call along the coastline. Here, for example, we docked at the historic town of Castine, located at the mouth of the Penobscot River. The flags of France, Holland, and England have flown over Castine, and Milt and I spent several hours touring the area known as Fort George. The fort was permanently abandoned in 1819.
Here we're approaching Deer Isle Bridge, which connects Deer Isle with the mainland. It's a tremendous structure, and from a distance it seemed quite high above the water. But as we approached it, a few of us got a little queasy, wondering if we'd lose the mast. Well, as they say in the movies, we made it.
A time-honored tradition of the sea is that swabbing the decks is man's work, but not aboard the Maddie. And men being what they are, they thought it was a big joke. Actually, we girls enjoyed it.
When we saw this small plane approaching us at Northeast Harbor, we quickly made ready to drop anchor. It seems that the pilot, Mel Billings, is a friend of the Nesbits and frequently interrupts these cruises to pass the time of day. Now, I've been flying small planes since I was old enough to apply for a license, so Mel and I hit it off right away. He offered me the chance to shoot some aerial films, and naturally I accepted. The gang aboard the Maddie made a big thing out of it, but I didn't mind the kidding because the aerial views were just breathtaking. This is Somme Sound.
While Milt and Mel were exploring the wild blue yonder, the rest of us landlubbers enjoyed a few hours at anchor. And as always, the cut-ups hammed it up.
Up anchor, and we're off again, under full sail.
All of us wondered about the sister ship, the Mercantile, and whether we'd meet up with each other. Well, Captain Jim saw to it that we did.
The schooner Maddie, WH9540, calling schooner Mercantile. Come in, schooner Mercantile. Hello, Captain Waller. This is Captain Jim. We're planning on having some entertainment aboard the Maddie tonight. Why don't you bring your gang all over as soon as you anchor?
Rendezvous we did, and man, it was a swinging affair. The gang from the Mercantile left us shortly after midnight, 7 and 8 at a time. We were sorry they couldn't stay longer so that we could get to know each other better. Anyway, they seemed just as nice as our own passengers on the Maddie, and we gave them a 21-gun firecracker salute.
We'll continue exploring the coast of Maine aboard the Maddie, following this time out for our sponsor.
By now, after a week aboard ship, we felt like old salt, and we begged Captain Maury to give us a turn at the wheel. Here, we're approaching Stonington, and it's even prettier than it looks.
These frequent landfalls were every bit as interesting as being out on the open sea. Judy and I had never been to Maine, although Judy was raised in New York and schooled at Syracuse. Now, on this particular morning, Captain Jim and his wife Dorothy had decided it was about time that the landlubbers dug for their supper, and they meant it literally. As I'm sure you Easterners know, we're digging for clams. This was a new one on me, since I was raised in the heart of California. And maybe it's a lot of fun, but man, we sure weren't getting paid for it.
Well, I loved it. It took me back to my childhood and many happy weekends on Long Island Sound.
Now here was something that a native Californian like me could understand. Fishing. And here the big news is lobster fishing. And I mean lobsters. In my whole life, I've never seen so many lobster traps. And most of the traps that we're looking at right now belong to a Mr. Charles Cushman, who is 76 and has 6 sons, 5 of whom are lobster fishermen. We visited Mr. Cushman and found him to be as real as the state of Maine.
How do the lobsters go into the trap, and why do they go in?
Oh, well, we have bait on this line here. Make them in through this one and this one. After the bait, and after they get in there, well, this is the easiest way out. They crawl out in here, what they call the bedroom.
Oh, they think they're going out, but actually
Yeah, they think they're going out and they're getting no trouble, that's all.
What lures the lobsters into the trap?
Why, we have bait here on this line, and they come in through these 2 heads here after the bait.
What kind of bait do you use?
Well, sometimes we have these small trimmings from sardines put in bags, and sometimes we have what they call the brim trimming. They cut off the fillets off of them. We use them for bait.
How many traps do you work in an average string?
Why, we have around 400, the 2 of us, my youngest boy and I.
That's a lot of traps.
Yes, quite a lot.
How many lobsters do you average per trap, usually?
Well, when the season gets here good, we generally get 2 or 3, sometimes 4 or 5.
Mr. Cushman, what is this? What is this used for?
That's what they call a pot buoy that floats on top of the water. That's the way we get them. We gaff the buoy, and then we haul up this warp till we come to our trap.
Oh, then this points out where the trap is on the water.
And holds the warp up while we can get a hold of it. Would you like to take a trip out and see how it's done someday?
Love to.
We'd love to.
Perhaps we can arrange it tomorrow.
Well, we shook hands on it, and in Maine, a handshake is stronger than a written contract. True to his word, Mr. Cushman took us out the next morning to reap the harvest of the sea, real Maine lobsters.
You know my Judy is kind of brave in a cowardly sort of way. With all her big talk about digging for clams on Long Island, she was scared to death of a couple of lobsters.
Later that afternoon, the 2 sister ships met again. And I'm sure you know what we had for dinner. The most wonderful, the most succulent, the very best lobster in the world, Maine lobsters.
In my native California, our lobster is called crayfish. It's good, but I'll have to admit, it's not like Maine lobster.
This is one of the nice things about life at sea. So very little goes to waste. The seagulls stayed with us for hours.
We're sailing now in the direction of Owl's Head, just south of Rockland, Maine. Obligingly, Captain Maury dropped anchor so that Judy and I could visit the Lighthouse, which is maintained by the Coast Guard. We were greeted by First-Class Petty Officer Leon Dietz, who lives here with his family and operates the Lighthouse.
When Mr. Dietz uncovered the giant lamp, I couldn't help admiring his housekeeping. It glistened like newly polished silver. Why is the light covered?
The light is covered because it's protected from the sun, and the magnifying would burn the wiring out.
Well, how far can the ships at sea see it?
Approximately 16 miles on a good clear night.
Oh, that's a long way out.
How many watts of the bulb?
The light bulb is 1,000 watts, and it's 27,300 candle power.
How far can you hear the bells or foghorn?
The station here has a siren instead of foghorn, and they can be heard at approximately 4 miles.
As Milt mentioned, Mr. Dietz lives here at the Lighthouse with his family, his wife Claire, 2 daughters, and also 2 sons who are away for the summer. We were invited in for coffee and also to meet Mrs. Dietz. Your husband took us on a wonderful tour of the Lighthouse. I know he likes it. How do you like it, Mrs. Dietz?
I just love it here. I think it's just beautiful. Very quiet.
I guess it is. Do you have many visitors here?
We have visitors down here all the time. It is one of the most noted lighthouses there is along the coast of Maine.
Do the children like living here?
They just love it. They have their own private swimming beach down here and riding bicycle all day long.
It's a wonderful place, I guess, for children. There aren't any cars or no traffic.
A very wonderful place.
How many years have you been attending lighthouses, Mr. Dietz?
Approximately 14 years.
Well, now, in all that time, have you found that it gets boring or not?
No, I love this life. It's a wonderful life.
You've told us that all lighthouses in Maine are attended by Coast Guard personnel. Other than that, what are the requirements to do this type of work?
Well, there's no special requirements. It's, you have to know all about age of navigation, and you have to be a boatswain. This station here calls for a boatswain first, petty officer first class.
Gee, I guess it's getting time for us to go.
Well, we certainly have enjoyed the tour, and thank you so much for the coffee.
You're welcome. Come again anytime.
Well, thank you.
We will. By the time we were ready to leave, daylight had ended, and we stayed long enough to watch the light in operation. The lighthouse was built in 1826, a century and a half of saving untold thousands of lives and ships. This, too, is part of the job when you work for good old Jack Douglas, the brave armchair adventurer. Jack never gives us a script in these assignments, just a lot of ideas, like getting into the boatswain's chair to film shots of the deck from the top of the mast.
I was really quite apprehensive seeing Milt dangling like that, because although the sea looked calm, Captain Maury said that a squall was brewing, and Milt came down as fast as he could.
Sure enough, the squall hit us about 20 minutes later. And if this is just an ordinary Maine squall, I don't want to be around when they have a real storm.
Although it continued to rain for a bit, the waves subsided, and we emerged from below deck, feeling sheepish but relieved.
Well, this is a calm that follows a storm, and that same afternoon it would be journey's end. There's Camden Harbor ahead, and an hour later we were tied up alongside the Mercantile, which had preceded us back to port by a couple of hours. Some of our fellow passengers who lived in or near Maine had friends and relatives on hand to meet them, but since Judy and I had no one, we stayed on a bit before saying our goodbyes to the Nesbits and Captain Maury.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking for a different kind of a vacation, you'll find it here in Camden each summer, aboard 2 of America's last remaining windjammers, the Maddie and the Mercantile. From a sentimental viewpoint, the 2 weeks aboard the Maddie meant a great deal to us. But I think that Milt and I will say thank you for watching our films, and we'll let Jack explain.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, after finishing this Windjammer assignment, Milt and Judy handed us their notice. They've decided to stop adventuring, settle down, and maybe raise a family. They've been married about a year now, but I have a hunch that all I have to do is pick up the phone and say, listen, I've got 2 tickets for you on the next plane to Hong Kong. And I also have a strange feeling that Milt and Judy would say, hold that plane, we're packing. I think we'll get them back. I'd like to thank Milt and Judy for taking us aboard the Windjammer, and as always, my thanks to you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.